This is the Dr. A Show with your host, Dr. Will Aguila.
On today's show, we're going to talk about a subject that affects many of us on a daily basis, and that is chronic fatigue. If you are tired all the time and you just can't seem to find the energy, this segment is for you. Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum, author of The Fatigue and Fibromyalgia Solution, will join us. Later in the show, we will interview renowned celebrity veterinarian Karen Doc Holligan and find out what every pet owner should know about their most beloved member of the family, their pet. Stick around for an hour of great information. First, are you tired all the time? Do you lack energy throughout the day and fall asleep in traffic? Well, our next guest says he has a solution. Jacob Teitelbaum, MD, is a board-certified internist, researcher, and expert in the areas of chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, pain, and sleep. He has written 5 books, including the best-selling From Fatigue to Fantastic, and he lectures to patients, physicians, and research groups about his treatment programs and has made appearances on Good Morning America, Dr. Oz, Oprah and Friends. His newest book is The Fatigue and Fibromyalgia Solution, the essential guide to overcoming chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. Well, hi, Dr. Teitelbaum. Welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Dr. A.
Now, in the book you mentioned chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. What are they and how are they different? Yeah, I think people need to know that.
Absolutely. Both of these represent an energy crisis that has gotten so severe that your body blows a fuse. And, well, here's how I describe the difference. If a person with a disease goes into the infectious disease doctor, they'll come out with a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. If they walk out the door and go right next door to the rheumatologist, then they'll come out with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. Basically the same disease in most people.
But how do you know if you have one or the other?
Well, the way that you tell if you have chronic fatigue syndrome / fibromyalgia, because people who have one usually have both, is if you have, and a key thing is how do you tell if you have that versus just day-to-day fatigue? And the way you tell that is if you can't sleep even though you're exhausted, and it's gone on for months despite a vacation. So if you take time off, and most of us have insomnia once in a while, but if you've gone on for 6 months and you're exhausted and you can't get a good night's sleep despite the exhaustion, and then you also have widespread pain and brain fog, you've got fibromyalgia / chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, there may be other things causing it. And that the key part of the job, making the diagnosis, is that easy. You're just tired, achy, brain fog, and can't sleep. But then the key thing is figuring out, well, why did you blow the fuse? What's causing the energy crisis? And that's what takes the time, but that's how you learn how to get well.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here, and because a lot of people are going to wonder, well, is fibromyalgia real, or is it a made-up disease? I mean, does it really exist?
Oh, it's absolutely real. You're not old enough to remember, but multiple sclerosis used to be called hysterical paralysis, and people are asking the same questions. Lupus, I'm old enough to remember this, because lupus used to be just considered this neuroses that women had, until when I was in medical school, they came out with what's called the LE PrEP. And suddenly these women went from being neurotic to having a real disease. And fibromyalgia, the research is very, very clear. There are a host of immunologic disorders. We see small fiber neuropathy in half, other neuropathies in more than half. We see many different kinds of disordered sleep issues. The biochemical derangements are widespread and severe. So it's very, very obvious that this is a real disease. Now, the problem is that there's no test that's only positive in the illness. There's many abnormal tests.
What lab tests would there be, if any, that you would try to get to prove fibromyalgia?
Well, if you're looking at it to prove, you'll see, first of all, a lot of people say it's depression, or not so many people say that anymore, but depression is associated with an elevated non-suppressible cortisol, where chronic fatigue syndrome, the cortisol tends to be on the low end. You'll see the hypothalamic pituitary axis dysfunction. You'll see widespread decreases in, say, in immunity, such as natural killer cell activity tends to be dramatically low. You'll see IgG.
Okay, wait. Let's put it in regular English so that people will understand that.
The immune system shot. The brain has a really high sensitivity to pain, and they can't sleep worth a damn.
Okay. But what happens is that these substances in your body, the antibodies, don't work as well?
They're low. They're in the lowest 2% of the population.
So that's one way that suggests that you may have this, along with many other things. So your cortisol levels may be low as well. Those cortisol, of course, a lot of people know what that is. It's that hormone that goes up, that goes up in your body when you're under stress, right?
Exactly.
Thyroid hormone, does that make a difference?
Yes,
or?
Absolutely. We talk about people blowing a fuse with the energy crisis. And that fuse, that circuit breaker, is called the hypothalamus. That's the name for that. If you went to the circuit panel of the brain, that's the one that's flipped into hibernation mode. It controls sleep so you can't sleep. It controls your entire hormone system through the pituitary. So this study showed the thyroid function is low, adrenal function is low, 30%, well, 70% of men with this disease are in the lowest 30th percentile for testosterone levels. Other hormones are low. We're seeing multiple studies showing that the ability to maintain blood pressure is low. People usually run a low blood pressure with this disease. So that one control system being off, non-functioning, explains a big part of what's going on in the illness.
Let's contrast it with just regular fatigue, your everyday fatigue. That you work, you get stressed, you have a busy day. I mean, how does that feel?
Feels like tired. So the key thing is that it's the difference between day-to-day fatigue versus really blowing a fuse. It's like the difference between being tired versus having the flu, to give you an idea of the qualitative difference between them. Where you ache all over and your brain's not working and you're exhausted and those kind of things. So the key difference then, one, it's a totally different process, but two, how do you treat them? How do you restore energy production? And that's what the SHINE protocol is about. And our research
we're going to talk about that. We want to talk about that in a little bit. But before we talk about that, I want to ask you a few more things about fibromyalgia. Why do people with fibromyalgia have pain?
Well, if you look at muscles are like springs. They take more energy to relax than to contract. So if you think about writer's cramp or even rigor mortis, when the muscles don't have energy, they go into this stiff and shortened position. And after they do that for a couple of weeks or years, they hurt. When you have chronic pain, pain is your body's way of saying pay attention. And when the causes are not addressed, the pain gets louder and louder and louder. It's called central sensitization. And then you start to see the nerves that conduct it start to die back. It's called small fiber neuropathy that the recent study showed about half of people with fibromyalgia have. So you'll see that the pain comes from the muscles, followed by coming from the nerves, and then the volume is turned up, so even normal touch can start to hurt.
And tell me, so that explains the pain. Tell me a little bit about this brain fog also that you mentioned a couple of times. What does that mean?
Well, it's difficulty with word finding and word substitutions. They may substitute the word fork for knife or have trouble coming up with names more than would be normal, to the point where if you find yourself hesitating for a moment thinking about what your kids' names are, or if you call your husband by one name instead of the other, that's not a Freudian slip in this disease. That's a brain fog. And short-term memory, a lot of people, if they're reading something from the time they get to the top of the page to the bottom, they don't remember it.
They also, that's different from Alzheimer's, right?
Oh, totally different. With brain fog, you constantly forget where you left the keys. With Alzheimer's, you forget how to use the keys. Very different process. Okay. And you'll see that there are specific changes, the alterations in blood flow. The brain, you'll see areas of the brain in fibromyalgia where the blood flow is markedly decreased, especially to the areas involved with speech and word finding, for example. And then the hormonal shifts, the infections that go on because the immune system's down, all of these will contribute to feeling foggy.
And also increased thirst. You're thirsty all the time.
Yep, the technical description is drink like a fish and pee like a racehorse, because one of the hormones controlled by the hypothalamus is anti-diuretic hormone or anti-peeing hormone. So that's what holds water. You pee it all out, and therefore, I tell people you drink more water, and they say, well, I'm drinking 3 times what my mom was drinking, and I say, yeah, but you're peeing 4 times. So...
And of course, decrease in the libido and weight gain are also associated with it.
73% will have loss of libido and an average 32.5-pound weight gain.
Oh, quite a bit, yeah.
It's a nasty disease.
So, obviously a lot of symptoms are associated with this. It is a conglomerate of symptoms. And those listening may have some. The problem is that some of these symptoms may overlap, such as with diabetes, right? Especially the thirst and going to the bathroom often and urinating. We'll talk a little bit more about that after the break, so hold on. We are speaking with Dr. Teitelbaum, and he is the author of the Fatigue and Fibromyalgia Solution, the Essential Guide to Overcoming Chronic Fatigue and Fibromyalgia. Stay with us as we talk about what you can do about chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia as the Dr. A Show continues.
And now, back to the Dr. A Show with your host, Dr. Will Aguila.
Welcome back to the show. Our guest today is Dr. Teitelbaum. His book is The Fatigue and Fibromyalgia Solution, the Essential Guide to Overcoming Chronic Fatigue and Fibromyalgia. And you can find him at nfatigue.com. Great name, by the way, Dr. Teitelbaum, nfatigue.com. Excellent website name. Now, before the break, we were talking about fibromyalgia and all the symptoms that are associated with that. And because I want to make sure that if there are people out there listening and they hear these symptoms, they say, you know what, I've been living like this. I've been living with chronic fatigue. I didn't know what it was. But, that's not to say that they need to diagnose themselves. They obviously should seek good medical attention. And before we head into your protocol, if somebody has these symptoms and they're interested in seeing a specialist, what should they be looking for? Who should they be looking for, and what qualities?
Two main groups. In terms of making the diagnosis, going to a rheumatologist is probably your best bet. But in terms of getting effective treatment, going to a holistic physician, and you can find over 1,700 board-certified holistic physicians at abIhm.org. So one of those two. You want somebody who's really familiar with pain, a physical medicine and rehabilitation physician, for example, that comes from an internal medicine background, can be very helpful for this disease. There's no one specialty, but the best thing is find somebody who either had it or has a family member with it. Those are the physicians most likely to be familiar with it.
Okay, so now you've done that, you've been diagnosed, you came up with a protocol you call the SHINE protocol, S-H-I-N-E. What does that stand for? And let's go through some of these if you don't mind as well.
S stands for sleep, H is hormonal support, and infections, nutritional support, and exercise as able. Our research showed that when you do those 5 areas, 91% of people improve with an average 90% increase in quality of life. It was a quite dramatic difference versus the placebo group.
Oh, absolutely. So tell us about, let's start with the first one, sleep. Most of us don't get enough of that, believe me. So how does that differ in this disease, and what can we do about it?
Well, the average night's sleep used to be 9 hours a night until 130 years ago when there were light bulbs. And what's happening now, it's about 6 3/4. But people with fibromyalgia, they can lie in bed all night, and they may get 3-4 hours of sleep, and even that's not deep, restful sleep. So unable to fall asleep, stay asleep, and people know the difference. If you ask somebody with fibro, can you get a good night's sleep, they look at you like, are you insane? There's no, I'm lucky to get 3-4 hours a night. So we'll start with natural remedies. For most people, I like simple herbal support. There's a mix of 6 herbs called the Revitalizing Sleep Formula. These most people sleeping like a puppy. Melatonin, 1/2 milligram. The smell of lavender will help sleep. All these simple things. In fibromyalgia, they will need medication, but very low doses because they're sensitive, and not the usual sleep medications that are addictive, but rather things like trazodone, Flexeril, Neurontin. Low doses of these will help sleep.
So not your usual sleep medicines that other people take. They do better with the medications that are more muscle relaxing and
what's called GABA, or the anti-epileptic drugs. But the standard things like Dalmane and Valium, they're addictive. They keep people in light sleep, which is they're missing the deep sleep. We will use Ambien sometimes, but it needs to be used with some caution.
We already talked about in the last segment how this relates to hormonal deficit that starts in the up in the brain and the pituitary. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, basically, you're going to have low thyroid, even though the blood tests are normal. And the way you tell if you're tired, achy, weight gain, and cold intolerant, Those are the symptoms of low thyroid. We could do a whole show talking about why the tests aren't reliable, but an example that Dr. Oz likes to use that I gave him was a normal range for shoe sizes. You take 100 people, the normal range is a 95 in the middle, and that's all the normal range means. They didn't teach most of us that in medical school. So if I had a normal range for shoe sizes, it would be 4 to 13. But that doesn't mean I can stick you in a size 4 shoe and have it fit. So you have to look at the symptoms in combination with the test. People, basically, I think a trial of thyroid hormone is appropriate for virtually everybody with fibromyalgia unless they're hyperthyroid, unless they have an overactive thyroid. Adrenal support, that's a stress handler. The way you diagnose is if you get really irritable and hungry. If you want to find people with low adrenal, go to the divorce lawyers' offices and marital counselors' waiting rooms because the blood sugar drops and the claws come out. And once you treat the adrenal, and you can do it with some licorice, adrenal glandulars, vitamin C, B5, that smooths right out. And all of a sudden, it's funny, you'll see people who are on the edge of divorcing, their mood stabilizes, their relationship stabilizes out, and so does their energy. Low estrogen, again, the tests won't be abnormal till you're estrogen and progesterone deficient for 5 to 12 years. So how do you tell? If you're tired, achy, headache, brain foggy, and it's much worse around your periods, then you know that's when the estrogen is low. You give some bioidentical estrogen, not the synthetic stuff, which is quite toxic. And in men, the bioidentical testosterone can be very helpful if the blood test is in the lowest 30th percentile. So it's pretty straightforward.
Wait. So let's talk about that for a minute. Can this disease affect men as well? Can this disease affect men as well?
Absolutely. 1 out of 4 people with the illness are male. I had the disease. Actually knocked me out of med school for a year and left me homeless for most of it, much of it. So it can. It's about 3, like most immune diseases, if you look at rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, all those are immune diseases. They affect about 3 women for every man. And the same for the CFS and fibro.
So it can happen to men. Yeah. You mentioned infections as well.
The immune system is down, so there's literally dozens of infections that have been implicated in this disease, and you don't have to chase them all. But there's one called Candida. It's the same yeast or fungal infection that women will get down below. But that's not the problem. The problem is when it gets in the guts and overgrows in the intestines and the sinuses. And you'll see, because people have spastic colon, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation kind of stuff, and they'll have chronic nasal congestion and sinusitis. And that's how you know to treat the Candida. When you treat the Candida, those problems go away, and a lot of other things clear up as well.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that explains a lot of symptoms. Now, nutritional deficiencies, what type of nutritional deficiencies?
Everything. The American diet is awful. Because of food processing, we have half of our calories have been stripped of vitamins and minerals. 18% of our diet comes from from sugar, 18% from white flour, another added fat. So basically, we have people who are obese and vitamin and mineral deficient all at the same time. So I tell people to get a good multivitamin. Most of them are not so good, and I don't want people taking a handful of pills all day. But for anybody who wants really solid nutritional support, there's a vitamin powder I'll use called the Energy Revitalization System, where 1 drink replaces 35, 40 pills. And another study of ours showed that adding another nutrient called ribose, which is sugar of all things, but it's one made by your body. It's not the same as regular sugar. Increased energy an average of 61% at 3 weeks in people with fibros. So I just have people take 1 scoop of the vitamin powder, add in a 5-gram scoop of the ribose or Corvalin, and they'll find that their energy within a month, they're going to be starting to feel a good bit better. The vitamin powder is very good for bariatric surgery too. Because these people have a lot of severe nutritional deficiencies, but just at half a scoop to prevent dumping syndrome from happening.
Now, it seems that there are all sorts of treatments out there for fibromyalgia. You explained some very good ones here, but how about hyperbaric oxygen? And that's oxygen under pressure in a decompression chamber for those that are listening. Is that a good treatment for fibromyalgia?
It goes both ways, because you'll see that there's decreased blood flow to certain areas as it closes down. So you'll sometimes see an initial improvement, and there's some very good doctors who use it, but in the long term, it also depletes the free radical. It increases free radical activity and depletes antioxidants. So basically, if you're going to do it, you have to give the antioxidants with it, or you're going to get initially better and then worse.
And the antioxidants, of course, are what?
vitamin C, vitamin E, lipoic acid. The vitamin powder will have that. I mean, any good multivitamin should have a lot of those. The key one is glutathione, though, and for those you give glutamine, glycine, cysteine, and vitamin C. That's kind of a blah, blah, blah kind of thing. Basically, you want a multi that's got you covered for all that. And the vitamin powder will do that.
Now, what role does seasonal affective disorder play in chronic fatigue syndrome? Do they have any overlap?
They do have some overlap, but it's a minimal one. You'll see that people will have a lot of the brain chemicals low, including serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, and a half a dozen others. In seasonal affective disorder, the serotonin goes low. So that's going to aggravate somebody who already has that problem. With the fibromyalgia, the SAD can make that worse. So if it's worse during the winter time, I'll have people do a light box. But interestingly, you'll also see it go the other direction, where you have people have seasonal affective disorder that happens only in the heat of summertime. And the treatment for that is air conditioning. You'll have that more down south in Florida.
We can definitely use that here in Florida. Anyway, it was a pleasure having you on the show. And the book, again, is called The Fatigue and Fibromyalgia Solution by Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum. Dr. Teitelbaum, where can our listeners contact you if they wish to do so?
Well, we do see people from all over the world by phone consultation, and endfatigue.com will have information. And we also have a free energy analysis program at endfatigue.com. It'll put in your symptoms, and then if you have lab tests, you can put those in. It'll tailor a treatment protocol to your case.
Well, thank you so much again for being on the show.
Doctor, a pleasure.
Coming up, what every pet owner should know, prescriptions for happy, healthy cats and dogs, with my guest, Dr. Karen Doc Halligan.